Imagine sitting across from someone who has done something unimaginable, and instead of fear, they speak calmly, almost like it's a story. Detectives who were part of this interrogation later said they couldn't believe their ears. What happened in that room changed how they thought about human behavior forever. Stay with me, and I'll explain why. Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into one of the most unusual and disturbing interrogations in modern police history. It's not about gore or violence, but about how someone's mind can operate in ways that can leave even trained detectives speechless. By the end, you'll understand why this case is so unique, and why it can teach us about human psychology, crime solving, and careful observation. Before we get into the interrogation itself, it helps to know the background. The suspect, let's call him Alex, had been linked to a serious crime, something that puzzled investigators for months. Evidence was limited and the case was growing colder. The detectives involved were experienced. They had seen various types of suspects, from the nervous and scared to the arrogant and overconfident. But Alex was different. From the moment he entered the room, there was a strange calmness about him. He didn't fidget or avoid eye contact. He didn't try to charm the officers either. Think about it. Imagine facing someone accused of a serious crime who seems almost unaffected by it. That alone can make the interrogation process much more complex. For viewers at home, this is where you start noticing how behavior and psychology matter in investigations. The first contact. When the detectives first started talking to Alex, they tried the usual methods: asking direct questions, presenting evidence, and observing reactions. Normally, suspects might show fear, hesitation, or even anger. But Alex's responses were calm, sometimes eerily precise, as if he had already anticipated every question. For example, when asked where he had been on a specific night, he gave a detailed timeline, enough to check against records. On the surface, it seemed believable, but something felt off. His tone didn't match the severity of the situation. Detectives often describe this feeling as a gut instinct that something isn't right. Here's where the first lesson comes in. Sometimes what someone doesn't show can tell you as much as what they do. For anyone watching, this is a reminder that observation goes beyond words. It's about patterns, inconsistencies, and intuition. Psychological tricks. As the interrogation continued, the detectives tried another approach: psychological techniques. This includes asking open-ended questions, allowing the suspect to talk freely, and looking for contradictions. Alex responded in ways that were unusual. He would give long answers but never reveal critical details. He sometimes repeated phrases, almost like rehearsed lines. Yet he also added small mistakes, tiny inconsistencies that a trained detective could notice. For instance, he might say he walked to a store at 7:15 p.m., but later mentioned traffic at 7:10 p.m. It's subtle, but detectives use these clues to build a bigger picture. For viewers, this is interesting because it shows how interrogation is like solving a puzzle. Each piece of information may seem minor, but together they reveal patterns. This part of the story teaches patience, observation, and critical thinking. Even in everyday life, noticing details can help you make better decisions. The moment that shocked detectives. The moment that truly left the detectives speechless came about halfway through the session. Alex suddenly smiled, not in a mocking way, but in a calm, almost detached way, and said something that didn't quite fit the situation. He described his actions during the crime in an oddly matter-of-fact way, almost as if narrating a story he had read in a book. The detectives were trained to stay professional, but even they admitted later that they had to pause for a moment to process what they had heard. This moment is key. It highlights how human behavior can sometimes be completely unpredictable. The detectives had encountered suspects who lied, who cried, or who tried to manipulate them. But Alex's response didn't match any of these patterns. To you watching, it's a reminder that not all human behavior fits neatly into expectations. Understanding that unpredictability is crucial, not just in crime solving, but in understanding people in general. The detective's strategy. Faced with this, the detectives had to adapt. They realized that traditional pressure tactics wouldn't work. Instead, they focused on active listening, letting Alex speak more while carefully noting inconsistencies and small behavioral cues. For example, when Alex tried to explain certain gaps in his story, his body language occasionally betrayed subtle signs of tension, a twitch, a pause, or a fleeting eye movement. Detectives use these micro-signals to guide their next questions. This part of the story demonstrates the value of strategy over force. Sometimes listening and observing quietly can be more powerful than confrontation. For anyone curious about negotiation or communication skills, this is a great takeaway. Breaking the pattern. Eventually, the detectives discovered a subtle technique that seemed to unsettle Alex. Instead of asking the usual direct questions, they prompted him to piece together events in a timeline he hadn't rehearsed. At first, he maintained his calm, composed demeanor, but gradually small cracks began to appear in his story. His answers grew slightly less fluid, and fleeting micro-expressions hinted at tension he hadn't shown before. He didn't confess outright, and the change was barely noticeable if you weren't paying close attention. Yet, these minor inconsistencies gave the investigators critical clues they could check and verify. For viewers at home, this part of the story is especially interesting. It shows that even people who seem completely in control may have vulnerabilities, and that careful observation combined with persistence can reveal truths that might otherwise stay hidden. Lessons from the interrogation. Looking back, this interrogation teaches multiple lessons. 1. Observation matters. Details that seem small can reveal inconsistencies. 2. Behavior is complex. Calmness, smiles, or unusual speech patterns may indicate more than what is being said. 3. Adaptability is key. When a suspect doesn't respond to usual tactics, changing strategy is essential. Even outside law enforcement, these points are useful. For example, in negotiations, interviews, or even personal relationships, noticing patterns and adjusting your approach can lead to better outcomes. For those watching, you might try noticing subtle cues in everyday life, body language, tone, or hesitation. You don't need to be a detective to see patterns or ask questions thoughtfully. Final thoughts. The interrogation ended without dramatic confessions in the room itself, but it provided detectives with critical insights that helped them piece together the case. Alex remained calm, but the detectives' careful observation, patience, and attention to detail allowed them to connect the dots outside the interrogation room. For viewers, this story isn't about fear or shock. It's about understanding human behavior and learning the value of patience, strategy, and observation. Sometimes what seems disturbing is simply a reminder of how complex people can be. If you found this story intriguing, take a moment to think about your own experiences. Have you ever noticed subtle behaviors that told you more than words?